Chapter 92. Ambergris. Now, this ambergris is a very curious substance and so important as an article of commerce that in 1791 a certain Nantucket-born Captain Coffin was examined at the bar of the English House of Commons on the subject. For at that time, and indeed until a comparatively late day, the precise origin of ambergris remained like amber itself a problem to the learned edition, though the word ambergris is but a French compound for gray amber. Yet the two substances are quite distinct. For amber, though at times found on the sea coast, is also dug up in some far inland soils, whereas ambergris is never found except upon the sea. Besides, amber is a hard, transparent, brittle, odorless substance used for mouthpieces to pipes, for beads and ornaments. But ambergris is soft, waxy, and so highly fragrant and spicy that it is largely used in perfumery in pastels, precious candles, hair powders, and pomatum. The Turks use it in cooking and also carry it to Mecca for the same purpose that frankincense is carried to St. Peter's in Rome. Some wine merchants drop a few grains into claret to flavor it. Who would think, then, that such fine ladies and gentlemen should regale themselves with an essence found in the inglorious bowels of a sick whale? Yet so it is. By some ambergris is supposed to be the cause, and by others the effect of the dyspepsia in the whale. How to cure such a dyspepsia? It were hard to say, unless by administering 3 or 4 boatloads of brand pills, and then running out of harm's way, as laborers do in blasting rocks. I have forgotten to say that there were found in this ambergris certain hard round bony plates, which at first Stubb thought might be sailors' trousers buttons. But afterwards it turned out that they were nothing more than pieces of small squid bones embalmed in that manner. Now that the incorruption of this most fragrant ambergris should be found in the heart of such decay, is this nothing? Think thee of that saying of St. Paul in Corinthians about corruption and incorruption, how that we are sown in dishonor but raised in glory. And likewise call to mind that saying of Paracelsus about what it is that mocketh the best musk. Also forget not the strange fact that of all things of ill savor, cologne water in its rudimental manufacturing stages is the worst saint. I should like to conclude the chapter with the above appeal, but cannot, owing to my anxiety to repel a charge often made against whaleman, and which, in the estimation of some already biased minds, might be considered as indirectly substantiated by what has been said of the Frenchman's 2 whales. Elsewhere in this volume, the slanderous aspersion has been disproved that the vocation of whaling is throughout a slatterly, untidy business. But there is another thing to rebut. They hint that all whales always smell bad. Now, how did this odious stigma originate? I opine that it is plainly traceable to the first arrival of the Greenland whaling ships in London more than 2 centuries ago, because those whalemen did not then and do not now try out their oil at sea as the southern ships have always done, but cutting up the fresh blubber into small bits, thrust it through the bung holes of large casks, and carry it home in that manner. The shortness of the season in those icy seas and the sudden and violent storms to which they are exposed forbidding any other course. The consequence is that upon breaking into the hold and unloading one of these whale cemeteries in the Greenland dock, a savor is given forth somewhat similar to that arising from excavating an old city graveyard for the foundations of a lying hospital. I partly surmise also that this wicked charge against whalers may be likewise imputed to the existence on the coast of Greenland in former times of a Dutch village called Schmierenberg or Smirenberg, which latter name is the one used by the learned Fogo von Slack in his great work on Smells, a textbook on that subject, as its name imports smear fat. Berg to put up this village was founded in order to afford a place for the blubber of the Dutch whale fleet to be tried out without being taken home to Holland for that purpose. It was a collection of furnaces, fat kettles, and oil sheds, and when the works were in full operation, certainly gave forth no very pleasant savor. But all this is quite different with a South Sea sperm whaler, which in a voyage of 4 years perhaps after completely filling her hold with oil, does not perhaps consume. 50 days in the business of boiling out, and in the state that it is cast, the oil is nearly scentless. The truth is that living or dead, if but decently treated, whales as a species are by no means creatures of ill odor. Nor can whaleman be recognized as the people of the Middle Ages affected to detect a Jew in the company by the nose. Nor indeed can the whale possibly be otherwise than fragrant, when, as a general thing, he enjoys such high health, taking abundance of exercise, always out off-doors, though it is true, seldom in the open air. I say that the motion of a sperm whale's flukes above water dispenses a perfume, as when a musk-scented lady rustles her dress in a warm parlor. What then shall I liken the sperm whale to for fragrance, considering his magnitude? Must it not be to that famous elephant with jeweled tusks and redolent with myrar, which was led out of an Indian town to do honor to Alexander the Great? Chapter 93. The Castaway. It was but some few days after encountering the Frenchmen that a most significant event befell the most insignificant of the Pequod's crew. An event most lamentable, and which ended in providing the sometimes madly merry and predestinated craft with a living and ever-accompanying prophecy of whatever shattered sequel might prove her own. Now in the whale ship it is not everyone that goes in the boats. Some few hands are reserved, called shipkeepers, whose province it is to work the vessel while the boats are pursuing the whale. As a general thing, these shipkeepers are as hardy fellows as the men comprising the boat's crew. But if there happens to be an unduly slender, clumsy, or timorous wight in the ship, that wight is certain to be made a shipkeeper. It was so in the Pequod with the little Negro Pippin by nickname, Pip by abbreviation. Poor Pip. You have heard of him before. You must remember his tambourine on that dramatic midnight, so gloomy jolly. In outer aspect, Pip and Doughboy made a match like a black pony and a white one, of equal developments, though of dissimilar color, driven in one eccentric span. But while hapless Doughboy was by nature dull and torpid in his intellects, Pip, though over-tender-hearted, was at bottom very bright, with that pleasant, genial, jolly brightness peculiar to his tribe, a tribe which ever enjoy all holidays and festivities, with finer, freer relish than any other race. For blacks, the year's calendar should show naught but 365 4th of July and New Year's days. Nor smile so while I write that this little black was brilliant, for even blackness has its brilliancy. Behold yon lustrous ebony pan lead in king's cabinets. But Pip loved life and all life's peaceable securities, so that the panic-striking business in which he had somehow unaccountably become entrapped had most sadly blurred his brightness. Though, as he long will be seen, what was thus temporarily subdued in him, in the end was destined to be luridly illuminated by strange wild fires that fictitiously showed him off to 10 times the natural luster with which, in his native Talon County in Connecticut, he had once enlivened many a fiddler frolic on the green, and at melodious eventide, with his gay ha-ha, had turned the round horizon into one starboard tambourine. So though in the clear air of day, suspended against a blue-veined neck, the pure watered diamond drop will healthful glow, yet when the cunning jeweler would show you the diamond in its most impressive luster, he lays it against a gloomy ground, and then lights it up, not by the sun, but by some unnatural gases. Then come out those fiery effulgences, infernally superb. Then the evil blazing diamond, once the divinest symbol of the crystal skies, looks like some crown jewel stolen from the king of hell. But let us to the story. It came to pass that in the Ambergris affair, Stubbs after oarsman chanced so to sprain his hand, as for a time to become quite maimed, and temporarily Pip was put in his place. The first time Stubb lowered with him, Pip evinced much nervousness, but happily for that time escaped close contact with the whale, and therefore came off not altogether discreditably, though Stubb, observing him, took care afterwards to exhort him to cherish his courageousness to the utmost, for he might often find it needful. Now upon the second lowering, the boat paddled upon the whale, and as the fish received the darted iron, it gave its customary rap, which happened in this instance to be right under poor Pip's seat. The involuntary consternation of the moment caused him to leap, paddle in hand, out of the boat, and in such a way that part of the slack whale line coming against his chest, he breasted it overboard with him, so as to become entangled in it, when at last plumping into the water. That instant these stricken whales started on a fierce run. The line swiftly straightened, and presto, poor Pip came all foaming up to the chocks of the boat, remorselessly dragged there by the line which had taken several turns around his chest and neck. Tashago stood in the bows. He was full of the fire of the hunt. He hated Pip for a poltron. Snatching the boat knife from its sheath, he suspended its sharp edge over the line, and turning towards Stubb, exclaimed interrogatively, "Cut." Meanwhile, Pip's blue-choked face plainly looked, "Do for God's sake." All passed in a flash. In less than half a minute, this entire thing happened. Damn him. "Cut," roared Stubb. And so, the whale was lost, and Pip was save edition. So soon as he recovered himself, the poor little Negro was assailed by yells and execrations from the crew. Tranquil permitting these irregular cursings to evaporate, Stubb then, in a plain businesslike, but still half-humorous manner, cursed Pip officially, and that done unofficially gave him much wholesome advice. The substance was never jump from a boat, Pip, except, but all the rest was indefinite as the soundest advice ever is. Now, in general, stick to the boat is your true motto in whaling. But cases will sometimes happen when leap from the boat is still better. Moreover, as if perceiving at last that if he should give undiluted conscientious advice to Pip, he would be leaving him too wide a margin to jump in for the future, Stubbs suddenly dropped all advice and concluded with a peremptory command. "Stick to the boat, Pip, or by the Lord, I won't pick you up if you jump. Mind that we can't afford to lose whales by the likes of you. A whale would sell for 30 times what you would, Pip, in Alabama. Bear that in mind and don't jump any more." Hereby perhaps Stubb indirectly hinted that though man loved his fellow, yet man is a money-making animal, which propensity too often interferes with his benevolence. But we are all in the hands of the gods, and Pip jumped again. It was under very similar circumstances to the first performance, but this time he did not breast out the line, and hence, when the whale started to run, Pip was left behind on the sea like a hurried traveler's trunk. Alas, Stubb was but too true to his word. It was a beautiful, bounteous blue day, the spangled sea calm and cool and flatly stretching away all round to the horizon, like gold beater's skin hammered out to the extreme Saint bobbing up and down in that sea. Pip's ebon head showed like a head of cloves. No boat knife was lifted when he fell so rapidly astern. Stubb's inexorable back was turned upon him, and the whale was wing edition. In 3 minutes a whole mile of shoreless ocean was between Pip and Stubb. Out of the center of the sea, poor Pip turned his crisp, curling black head to the sun. Another lonely castaway, though the loftiest and the bright established. Now in calm weather, to swim in the open ocean is as easy to the practiced swimmer as to ride in a spring carriage ashore. But the awful lonesomeness is intolerable. The intense concentration of self in the middle of such a heartless immensity. My God, who can tell it? Mark how when sailors in a dead calm bathe in the open sea, mark how closely they hug their ship and only coast along her sides. But had Stubb really abandoned the poor little Negro to his fate? No, he did not mean to, at least, because there were 2 boats in his wake, and he supposed no doubt that they would, of course, come up to Pip very quickly and pick him up, though indeed such considerations towards oarsmen jeopardized through their own timidity is not always manifested by the hunters in all similar instances, and such instances not unfrequently occur. Almost invariably in the fishery, a coward, so-called, is marked with the same ruthless detestation peculiar to military navies and armies. But it so happened that those boats, without seeing Pip, suddenly spying whales close to them on one side, turned and gave chase, and Stubbs' boat was now so far away, and he and all his crew so intent upon the fish that Pip's ringed horizon began to expand around him miserably. By the merest chance, the ship itself at last rescued him. But from that hour the little Negro went about the deck an idiot. Such at least they said he was. The sea had jeeringly kept his finite body up, but drowned the infinite of his soul. Not drowned entirely, though, rather carried down alive to wondrous depths, where strange shapes of the unwarped primal world glided to and fro before his passive eyes. And the miser Merman wisdom revealed his hoarded heaps. And among the joyous, heartless, ever-juvenile eternities, Pip saw the multitudinous God omnipresent coral insects that out of the firmament of waters heaved the colossal orbs. He saw God's foot upon the treadle of the loom and spoke it, and therefore his shipmates called him mad. So man's insanity is heaven's sense, and wandering from all mortal reason, man comes at last to that celestial thought, which to reason is absurd and frantic, and weal or woe feels then uncompromised, indifferent as is God. For the rest, blame not Stubb too hardly. The thing is common in that fishery, and in the sequel of the narrative, it will then be seen what, like abandonment, befell myself. Chapter 94. A Squeeze of the Hand. That whale of Stubb's, so dearly purchased, was duly brought to the Pequod's side, where all those cutting and hoisting operations previously detailed were regularly gone through, even to the bailing of the H. Heilberg tun or case. While some were occupied with this latter duty, others were employed in dragging away the larger tubs so soon as filled with the sperm. And when the proper time arrived, this same sperm was carefully manipulated ere going to the try-works, of which anon, it had cooled and crystallized to such a degree that when, with several others, I sat down before a large Constantine's bath of it, I found it strangely concreted into lumps here and there, rolling about, out in the liquid part. It was our business to squeeze these lumps back into fluid. A sweet and anxious duty. No wonder that in old times this sperm was such a favorite cosmetic, such a clearer, such a sweetener, such a softener, such a delicious mlifier. After having my hands in it for only a few minutes, my fingers felt like eels and began, as it were, to serpentine and spiralize. As I sat there at my ease, cross-legged on the deck, after the bitter exertion at the windlass, under a blue tranquil sky, the ship under indolent sail, and gliding so serenely along, as I bathed my hands among those soft, gentle globules of infiltrated tissues, woven almost within the hour, as they richly broke to my fingers and discharged all their opulence like fully ripe grapes their wine, as I snuffed up that uncontaminated aroma, literally and truly like the smell of spring violets. I declare to you that for the time I lived as in a musky meadow. I forgot all about our horrible oath. In that inexpressible sperm, I washed my hands and my heart of it. I almost began to credit the old Paracelsan superstition that sperm is of rare virtue in allaying the heat of anger. While bathing in that bath, I felt divinely free from all ill will or petulance or malice of any sort whatsoever. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. All the morning long I squeezed that sperm till I myself almost melted into it. I squeezed that sperm till a strange sort of insanity came over me, and I found myself unwittingly squeezing my co-laborers' hands in it, mistaking their hands for the gentle globules. Such an abounding, affectionate, friendly, loving feeling did this avocation beget, that at last I was continually squeezing their hands, and looking up into their eyes sentimentally, as much as to say, "Oh, my dear fellow beings, why should we longer cherish any social acerbes, or know the slightest ill humor or envy? Come, let us squeeze hands all round. Nay, let us all squeeze ourselves into each other. Let us squeeze ourselves universally into the very milk and sperm of kindness. Would that I could keep squeezing that sperm forever. For now, since by many prolonged repeated experiences, I have perceived that in all cases man must eventually lower or at least shift his conceit of attainable felicity, not placing it anywhere in the intellect or the fancy, but in the wife, the heart, the bed, the table, the saddle, the fireside, the country. Now that I have perceived all this, I am ready to squeeze Casey tornily. In thoughts of the visions of the night, I saw long rows of angels in paradise, each with his hands in a jar of spermaceti. Now, while discoursing on sperm, it behooves to speak of other things akin to it in the business of preparing the sperm whale for the try-works. First comes white horse, so-called, which is obtained from the tapering part of the fish and also from the thicker portions of his flukes. It is tough with congealed tendons, a wad of muscle, but still contains some oil. After being severed from the whale, the white horse is first cut into portable oblongs, ere going to the mincer. They look much like blocks of Berkshire marble. Plum pudding is the term bestowed upon certain fragmentary parts of the whale's flesh here, and they're adhering to the blanket of blubber and often participating to a considerable degree in its anxiousness. It is a most refreshing, convivial, beautiful object to behold. As its name imports, it is of an exceedingly rich mottled tint with a brie snowy and golden ground dotted with spots of the deepest crimson and purple. It is plums of rubies and pictures of citroen. Spite of reason, it is hard to keep yourself from eating it. I confess that once I stole behind the foremast to try it. It tasted something, as I should conceive, a royal cutlet from the thigh of Lewis might have tasted, supposing him to have been killed the first day after the venison season. And that particular venison season, contemporary with an unusually fine vintage of the vineyards of Champagne. There is another substance, and a very singular one, which turns up in the course of this business, but which I feel it to be very puzzling adequately to describe. It is called slobgallion, an appellation original with the whaleman, and even so is the nature of the substance. It is an ineffably oozy, stringy affair, most frequently found in the tubs of sperm after a prolonged squeezing and subsequent decanting. I hold it to be the wondrously thin, ruptured membranes of the case coalescing. Glurry, so-called, is a term properly belonging to right whalemen, but sometimes incidentally used by the sperm fishermen. It designates the dark, glutinous substance which is scraped off the back of the Greenland or right whale, and much of which covers the decks of those inferior souls who hunt that ignoble leviathan. Nippers. Strictly, this word is not indigenous to the whale's vocabulary, but as applied by whaleman, it becomes so. A whaleman's nipper is the short, firm strip of tendinous stuff cut from the tapering part of the leviathan's tail. It averages an inch in thickness, and for the rest is about the size of the iron part of a hoe. Edgewise moved along the oily deck, it operates like a leather squelg, and by nameless blandishments, as of magic, allures along with it all impurities. But to learn all about these recondite matters, your best way is at once to descend into the blubber room and have a long talk with its inmates. This place has previously been mentioned as the receptacle for the blanket pieces when stripped and hoisted from the whale. When the proper time arrives for cutting up its contents, this apartment is a scene of terror to all tyros, especially by night. On one side, lit by a dull lantern, a space has been left clear for the workmen. They generally go in pairs, a pike and gaffman, and a spademan. The whaling pike is similar to a frigate's boarding weapon of the same name. The gaff is something like a boat hook. With his gaff, the gaffman hooks on to a sheet of blubber and strives to hold it from slipping as the ship pitches and lurches about. Meanwhile, the spademan stands on the sheet itself, perpendicularly chopping it into the portable horse pieces. This spade is sharp as hone can make it. The spademan's feet are shoeless. The thing he stands on will sometimes irresistibly slide away from him like a sledge. If he cuts off one of his own toes or one of his assistants, would you be very much astonished? Toes are scarce among veteran blubber room men. Chapter 95. The Cassock. Had you stepped on board the Pequod at a certain juncture of this post-mortemizing of the whale, and had you strolled forward nigh the windlass, pretty sure am I that you would have scanned with no small curiosity a very strange, enigmatical object which you would have seen there lying along lengthwise in the lee scuppers. Not the wondrous cistern in the whale's huge head, not the prodigy of his unhinged lower jaw, not the miracle of his symmetrical tail. None of these would so surprise you as half a glimpse of that unaccountable cone, longer than a cucky and as tall, nigh a foot in diameter at the base, and jet black as Yojo, the ebony idol of Quake. And an idol indeed it is. Or rather in old times its likeness was such an idol as that found in the secret groves of Queen Maha in Judea. And for worshipping which King Asa her son did depose her, and destroyed the idol, and burnt it for an abomination at the brook Kedron, as darkly set forth in the 15th chapter of the first book of Kings. Look at the sailor called the mincer who now comes along and assisted by two allies heavily backs the grandmammas as mariners call it, and with bowed shoulders staggers off with it, as if he were a grenadier carrying a dead comrade from the field. Extending it upon the focal deck, he now proceeds cylindrically to remove its dark pelt, as an African hunter the pelt of a boa. This done, he turns the pelt inside out like a pantaloon leg, gives it a good stretching so as almost to double its diameter, and at last hangs it well spread to the rigging to dry. Ere long it is taken down. When removing some 3 feet of it towards the pointed extremity, and then cutting 2 slits for armholes at the other end, he lengthwise slips himself bodily into it. The mincer now stands before you invested in the full canonicals of his calling, immemorial to all his order. This investiture alone will adequately protect him while employed in the peculiar functions of his office. That office consists in mincing the horse pieces of blubber for the pots, an operation which is conducted at a curious wooden horse, planted endwise against the bulwarks, and with a capacious tub beneath it, into which the minced pieces drop fast as the sheets from a rapt orator's desk. Array in decent black, occupying a conspicuous pulpit, intent on Bible leaves. What a candidate for an archbishopric! What a lad for a pope were this mincer! Footnote: Bible leaves. Bible leaves. This is the invariable cry from the mates to the mincer. It enjoins him to be careful and cut his work into as thin slices as possible, inasmuch as by so doing the business of boiling out the oil is much accelerated, and its quantity considerably increased, besides perhaps improving it in quality. End of footnote. Chapter 96. The Tryworks. Besides her hoisted boats, an American whaler is outwardly distinguished by her tryworks. She presents the curious anomaly of the most solid masonry joining with oak and hemp in constituting the completed ship. It is as if from the open field a brick kiln were transported to her planks. The tryworks are planted between the foremast and the mainmast, the most roomy part of the deck. The timbers beneath are of a peculiar strength, fitted to sustain the weight of an almost solid mass of brick and mortar, some 10 feet by 8 square and 5 in height. The foundation does not penetrate the deck, but the masonry is firmly secured to the surface by ponderous knees of iron bracing it on all sides and screwing it down to the timbers. On the flanks, it is cased with wood, and at top completely covered by a large sloping batten hatchway. Removing this hatch, we expose the great tripods, 2 in number and each of several barrels capacity. When not in use, they are kept remarkably clean. Sometimes they are polished with soapstone and sand till they shine within like silver punch bowls. During the night watches, some cynical old sailors will crawl into them and coil themselves away there for a nap. While employed in polishing them, one man in each pot side by side, many confidential communications are carried on over the iron lips. It is a place also for profound mathematical meditation. It was in the left-hand tripod of the peak quad, with the soapstone diligently circling around me, that I was first indirectly struck by the remarkable fact that in geometry all bodies gliding along the cycloid, my soapstone, for example, will descend from any point in precisely the same time. Removing the fireboard from the front of the tryworks, the bare masonry of that side is exposed, penetrated by the two iron mouths of the furnaces directly underneath the pots. These mouths are fitted with heavy doors of iron. The intense heat of the fire is prevented from communicating itself to the deck by means of a shallow reservoir extending under the entire enclosed surface of the works by a tunnel inserted at the rear. This reservoir is kept replenished with water as fast as it evaporates. There are no external chimneys. They open direct from the rear wall. And here, let us go back for a moment. It was about 9:00 at night that the Pequod's tryworks were first started on this present voyage. It belonged to Stubb to oversee the business. Already they're off hatch then, and starter. You cook, fire the works. This was an easy thing, for the carpenter had been thrusting his shavings into the furnace throughout the passage. Here be it said that in a whaling voyage the first fire in the tryworks has to be fed for a time with wood. After that no wood is used except as a means of quick ignition to the staple fuel. In a word, after being tried out, the crisp, shriveled blubber, now called scraps or fritters, still contains considerable of its anxious properties. These fritters feed the flames like a plethoric burning martyr or self-consuming misanthrope. Once ignited, the whale supplies his own fuel and burns by his own body. Would that he consumed his own smoke, for his smoke is horrible to inhale, and inhale it you moose saint, and not only that, but you must live in it for the time. It has an unspeakable wild Hindu odor about it, such as may lurk in the vicinity of funeral PS. It smells like the left wing of the Day of Judgment. It is an argument for the pit. By midnight the works were in full operation. We were clear from the carcass. Sail had been made. The wind was freshening. The wild ocean darkness was intense. But that darkness was licked up by the fierce flames which at intervals forked forth from the flue and illuminated every lofty rope in the rigging, as with the famed Greek fire. The burning ship drove on as if remorselessly commissioned to some vengeful dedition, so the pitch and sulphur-freighted brigs of the bold Hydriot chimeras issuing from there. Midnight harbors with broad sheets of flame for sails bore down upon the Turkish frigates and folded them in conflagrations. The hatch removed from the top of the works now afforded a wide hearth in front of them. Standing on this were the Tartarian shapes of the pagan harpooners, always the whale ship's stokers. With huge pronged poles, they pitched hissing masses of blubber into the scalding pots or stirred up the fires beneath, till the snaky flames darted, curling out of the doors to catch them by the feet. The smoke rolled away in sullen heaps. To every pitch of the ship there was a pitch of the boiling oil, which seemed all eagerness to leap into their faces. Opposite the mouth of the works, on the further side of the wide wooden hearth, was the windlass. This served for a sea sofa. Here lounged the watch when not otherwise employed, looking into the red heat of the fire till our eyes felt scorched in their heads. Their tawny features now all begrimed with smoke and sweat, their matted beards, and the contrasting barbaric brilliancy of their teeth. All these were strangely revealed in the capricious emlazings of the works, as they narrated to each other their unholy adventures, their tales of terror told in words of mirth, as their univolized laughter forked upwards out of them like the flames from the furnace. As to and fro in their front the harpooners wildly gesticulated with their huge pronged forks and dippers as the wind howled on, and the sea leaped, and the ship groaned and dived, and yet steadfastly shot her red hell further and further into the blackness of the sea in the night, and scornfully champed the white bone in her mouth, and viciously spat round her. On all sides, then the rushing Pequod, freighted with savages, and laden with fire, and burning a corpse, and plunging into that blackness of darkness. seemed the material counterpart of her monomaniac commander's soul. So seemed it to me, as I stood at her helm, and for long hours silently guided the way of this fire ship on the sea. Wrapped for that interval in darkness myself, I but the better saw the redness, the madness, the ghastliness of others. The continual sight of the fiend shapes before me, capering half in smoke and half in fire. These at last begot kindred visions in my soul, so soon as I began to yield to that unaccountable drowsiness, whichever would come over me at a midnight helm. But that night in particular, a strange and ever since inexplicable thing occurred to me. Starting from a brief standing sleep, I was horribly conscious of something fatally wrong. The jawbone tiller smoked my side, which leaned against it. In my ears was the low hum of sails just beginning to shake in the wind. I thought my eyes were open. I was half conscious of putting my fingers to the lids and mechanically stretching them still further apart. But spite of all this, I could see no compass before me to steer by. Though it seemed but a minute since I had been watching the card by the steady binnacle lamp illuminating it, nothing seemed before me but a jet gloom, now and then made ghastly by flashes of redness. Uppermost was the impression that whatever swift rushing thing I stood on was not so much bound to any haven ahead as rushing from all havens astern. A stark, bewildered feeling, as if death came over me. Convulsively my hands grasped the tiller, but with the crazy conceit that the tiller was somehow in some enchanted way invertidition. My God, what is the matter with me? I thought. Lo, in my brief sleep, I had turned myself about and was fronting the ship's stern, with my back to her prow and the compass. In an instant, I faced back just in time to prevent the vessel from flying up into the wind, and very probably capsizing her. How glad and how grateful the relief from this unnatural hallucination of the night, and the fatal contingency of being brought by the lee. Look not too long in the face of fire, O man. Never dream with thy hand on the helm. Turn not thy back to the compass, except the first hint of the hitching tiller. Believe not the artificial fire, when its redness makes all things look ghastly. Tomorrow in the natural sun the skies will be bright. Those who glared like devils in the forking flames the morn will show in far other, at least gentler relief. The glorious golden glad sun, the only true lamp. All others but liars. Nevertheless, the sun hides not Virginia's dismal swamp, nor Rome's Arsacides Cagna, nor wide Sahara, nor all the millions of miles of deserts and of griefs beneath the moon. The sun hides not the ocean, which is the dark side of this earth, and which is 2/3 of this earth. So therefore, that mortal man who hath more of joy than sorrow in him, that mortal man cannot be true, not true or undeveloped, with books the same. The truest of all men was the man of sorrows, and the truest of all books is Solomon's, and Ecclesiastes is the fine hammered steel of woe. All is vanity. All this willful world hath not got hold of unchristian Solomon's wisdom yet. But he who dodges hospitals and jails and walks fast crossing graveyards and would rather talk of operas than hell calls Cowper young Pascal Rousseau poor devils all of sick men and, throughout a carefree lifetime swears by rabbles as passing wise and therefore jolly. Not that man is fitted to sit down on tombstones and break the green damp mold with unfathomably wondrous Solomon. But even Solomon, he says, the man that wandereth out of the way of understanding shall remain, that is even while living in the congregation of the dead. Give not thyself up then to fire, lest it invert thee, deaden thee, as for the time it did me. There is a wisdom that is woe, but there is a woe that is madness. And there is a Catskill eagle in some souls that can alike dive down into the blackest gorges and soar out of them again and become invisible in the sunny spaces. And even if he forever flies within the gorge, that gorge is in the mountains, so that even in his lowest swoop, the mountain eagle is still higher than other birds upon the plain, even though they soar. Chapter 97. The Lamp. Had you descended from the Pequod's try-works to the Pequod's folk where the off-duty watch were sleeping, for one single moment, you would have almost thought you were standing in some illuminated shrine of canonized kings and counselors. There they lay in their triangular oaken vaults, each mariner a chiseled mutiness, a score of lamps flashing upon his hooded eyes. In merchantmen, oil for the sailor is more scarce than the milk of queens, to dress in the dark, to eat in the dark and stumble in darkness to his palate. This is his usual lot. But the whaleman, as he seeks the food of light, so he lives in light. He makes his berth in Aladdin's lamp and lays him down to it, so that in the pitchiest night the ship's black hull still houses an illumination. See with what entire freedom the whaleman takes his handful of lamps, often but old bottles and vials, though to the copper cooler at the try-works, and replenishes them there as mugs of ale at a vat. He burns to the purest of oils in its unmanufactured, and therefore unvisiated state, a fluid unknown to solar, lunar, or astral contrivances ashore. It is as sweet as early grass butter in April. He goes and hunts for his oil, so as to be sure of its freshness and genuineness, even as the traveler on the prairie hunts up his own supper of game. Chapter 98. Stowing down and clearing up. Already it has been related how the great Leviathan is afar off described from the masthead, how he is chased over the watery moors and slaughtered in the valleys of the deep, how he is then towed alongside and beheaded, and how on the principle which entitled the headsman of old to the garments in which the beheaded was killed, his great padded surto becomes the property of his executioner. How in due time he is condemned to the pots, and like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, his spermaceti, oil, and bone pass unscathed through the fire. But now it remains to conclude the last chapter of this part of the description by rehearsing, singing, if I may, the romantic proceeding of decanting off his oil into the casks and striking them down into the hold, where once again Leviathan returns to his native profundities, sliding along beneath the surface as before, but alas, never more to rise and blow. While still warm, the oil, like hot punch, is received into the 6-barrel casks. And while perhaps the ship is pitching and rolling this way and that in the midnight sea, the enormous casks are sewed round and headed over end for end, and sometimes perilously scoot across the slippery deck like so many landslides, till at last manhandled and stayed in their course. And all round the hoop's wrap go as many hammers as can play upon them. For now, exitio, every sailor is a cooper. At length, when the last pint is casked, and all is cool, then the great hatchways are unsealed, the bowels of the ship are thrown open, and down go the casks to their final rest in the sea. This done, the hatches are replaced and hermetically closed, like a closet walled up. In the sperm fishery, this is perhaps one of the most remarkable incidents in all the business of whaling. One day the planks stream with freshets of blood and oil. On the sacred quarter deck, enormous masses of the whale's head are profanely pillaged. Great rusty casks lie about, as in a brewery yard. The smoke from the try-works is besooted all the bulwarks. The mariners go about suffused with anxiousness. The entire ship seems great Leviathan himself, while on all hands the din is deafening. But a day or two after you look about you and prick your ears in this selfsame ship, and were it not for the telltale boats and try-works, you would all but swear you trod some silent merchant vessel with a most scrupulously neat commander. The unmanufactured sperm oil possesses a singularly cleansing virtue. This is the reason why the decks never look so white as just after what they call an affair of oil. Besides, from the ashes of the burned scraps of the whale, a potent lye is readily made, and whenever any adhesiveness from the back of the whale remains clinging to the side, that lye quickly exterminates it. Hands go diligently along the bulwarks, and with buckets of water and rags restore them to their full tidiness. The soot is brushed from the lower rigging. All the numerous implements which have been in use are likewise faithfully cleansed and put away. The great hatch is scrubbed and placed upon the try-works, completely hiding the pots. Every cask is out of sight. All tackles are coiled in unseen nooks. And when by the combined and simultaneous industry of almost the entire ship's company, the whole of this conscientious duty is at last concluded, then the crew themselves proceed to their own ablutions, shift themselves from top to toe, and finally issue to the immaculate deck. Fresh and all aglow, as bridegroom new leaped from out of the daintiest Holland. Now with a laudated step they pace the planks in twos and threes, and humorously discourse of parlors, sofas, carpets, and fine cambrics proposed to mat the deck. Think of having hanging to the top object, not to taking tea by moonlight on the piazza of the folks. To hint to such musk mariners of oil and bone and blubber were little short of audacity. They know not the thing you distantly allude to. Away and bring us napkins. But mark aloft there at the three-mast head stand 3 men intent on spying out more whales which if caught infallibly will again soil the old oak and furniture and drop at least one small grease spot somewhere. Yes, and many is the time when after the severest uninterrupted labors which know no night, continuing straight through 96 hours, when from the boat where they have swelled their wrists with all day rowing on the line, they only step to the deck to carry vast chains and heave the heavy windlass and cut and slash. Yea, and in their very sweatings to be smoked and burned anew by the combined fires of the equatorial sun and the equatorial try-works. When on the heels of all this, they have finally bid themselves to cleanse the ship and make a spotless dairy room of it. Many is the time the poor fellows, just buttoning the necks of their clean frocks, are startled by the cry of "There she blows," and away they fly to fight another whale and go through the whole weary thing again. Oh, my friends, but this is man-killing, yet this is life. For hardly have we mortals, by long toilings, extracted from this world's vast bulk its small but valuable sperm, and then with weary patience cleansed ourselves from its defilements, and learned to live here in clean tabernacles of the soul. Hardly is this done when, there she blows, the ghost is spouted up, and away we sail to fight some other world, and go through young life's old routine again. Oh, the metempsychosis! Oh, Pythagoras that in bright Greece 2,000 years ago did die, so good, so wise, so mild. I sailed with thee along the Peruvian coast last voyage, and foolish as I am, taught thee, a green, simple boy, how to splice a rope. Chapter 99. The Doubloon. Now it has been related how Ahab was wont to pace his quarter-deck, taking regular turns at either limit, the binnacle and main mast, but in the multiplicity of other things requiring narration, it has not been added how that sometimes in these walks, when most plunged in his mood, he was wont to pause and turn at each spot, and stand there strangely eyeing the particular object before him. When he halted before the binnacle, with his glance fastened on the pointed needle in the compass, that glance shot like a javelin with the pointed intensity of his purpose. And when resuming his walk, he again paused before the main mast. Then, as the same riveted glance fastened upon the riveted gold coin there, he still wore the same aspect of nailed firmness, only dashed with a certain wild longing, if not hopefulness. But one morning, turning to pass the Dion, he seemed to be newly attracted by the strange figures and inscriptions stamped on it, as though now for the first time beginning to interpret for himself in some monomanic way whatever significance might lurk in them. And some certain significance lurks in all things, else all things are little worth, and the round world itself but an empty cipher, except to sell by the cartload, as they do hills about Boston, to fill up some morass in the Milky Way. Now this Doubloon was of purest virgin gold wrad somewhere out of the heart of gorgeous hills whence east and west over golden sands the headwaters of many a Pactolus flows, and though now nailed amidst all the rustiness of iron bolts and the verdigris of copper spikes, yet untouchable and immaculate to any foulness, it still preserved its Quito glow, nor though placed amongst a ruthless crew in every hour passed by ruthless hands, and through the live long nights shrouded with thick darkness which might cover any piloring approach. Nevertheless, every sunrise found the Doubloon where sunset left at last, for it was set apart and sanctified to one accreing end. And however wanting in their sailor ways, one and all, the mariners revered it as the white whale's talisman. Sometimes they talked it over in the weary watch by night, wondering whose it was to be at last, and whether he would ever live to spend it. Now those noble golden coins of South America are as medals of the sun and tropic token pieces. Here palms, alpacas and volcanoes, sun's disks and stars, ecliptics, horns of plenty, and rich banners waving are in luxuriant profusion stamped, so that the precious gold seems almost to derive an added preciousness and enhancing glories by passing through those fancy mints so Spanishly poetic. It so chanced that the Doubloon of the Pequod was a most wealthy example of these things. On its round border, it bore the letters Republica del Ecuador, Quito. So this bright coin came from a country planted in the middle of the world and beneath the great equator and named after it. And it had been cast midway up the Andes in the unwaning climb that knows no autumn. Zoned by those letters you saw the likeness of 3 Andes summits. From one a flame, a tower on another, on the third a crowing, while arching over all was a segment of the partitioned zodiac. The signs all marked with their usual cabalistics, and the keystone sun entering the equinoxial point at Libra. Before this equatorial coin, Ahab, not unobserved by others, was now pausing. There's something ever egotistical in mountain tops and towers, and all other grand and lofty things. Look here, 3 peaks as proud as Lucifer, the firm tower that is Ahab, the volcano that is Ahab, the courageous, the undaunted and victorious fowl, that too is Ahab. All are Ahab, and this round gold is but the image of the rounder globe, which like the magician's glass to each and every man in turn, but mirrors back his own mysterious self. Great pains, small gains for those who ask the world to solve them. It cannot solve itself. He thinks now this coin's sun wears a ruddy face. But see how he enters the sign of storms, the equinox, and but 6 months before he wheeled out of a former equinox at Aries. From storm to estiarum. So be it then. Born in throes, it is fit that man should live in pains and die in pangs. So be it then. Here's stout stuff for woe to work on. So be it then. No fairy fingers can have pressed the gold, but the devil's claws must have left their moldings there since yesterday, murmured Starbucks to himself, leaning against the bulwarks. The old man seems to read Belshazzar's awful writing. I have never marked the coin inspectingly. He goes below. Let me read. A dark valley between 3 mighty heaven, abiding peaks that almost seem the Trinity in some faint earthly symbol. So in this vale of death, God girds us round. And over all our gloom, the sun of righteousness still shines a beacon and a hope. If we bend down our eyes, the dark veil shows her moldy soil. But if we lift them, the bright sun meets our glance halfway to cheer. Yet oh, the great sun is no fixture. And if at midnight we would fain snatch some sweet solace from him, we gaze for him in vain. This coin speaks wisely, mildly, truly, but still sadly to me. I will quit it lest truth shake me falsely. There now's the old mobile soliloquist Stubb by the try-works. He's been twigging it. And there goes Starbucks from the same. And both with faces which I should say might be somewhere within 9 fathoms long. And all from looking at a piece of gold, which did I have it now on Negro Hill or in Courier's Hook, I not look at it very long ere spending it. Humph. In my poor insignificant opinion, I regard this as queer. I have seen doubloons before now in my voyagings. Your Diones of old Spain, your Doubloon of Peru, your Doubloon of Chile, your Diones of Bolivia, your Diones of Paypan with plenty of gold moderless and Joes and half Joes and quarter Joes. What should there then be in this Doubloon of the equator that is so killing wonderful by Galconda? Let me read it once. Hello. Here's signs and wonders truly. That now is what old Bacon's epitome calls the zodiac, and what my almanac below calls ditto. I'll get the almanac. And as I have heard, devils can be raised with doubles arithmetic. I'll try my hand at raising a meaning out of these queer curb cues here with the Massachusetts calendar. Here's the book. Let's see now. Signs and wonders and the sun. He's always among them. Here they are. Here they go. All alive. Aries, or the ram. Taurus, or the bull. And Gemini. Here's Gemini himself, or the twins. Well, the sun he wheels among them. I hear on the coin he's just crossing the threshold between 2 of the 12 sitting rooms, all in a ring. Book, you lie there. The fact is, you books must know your places. You do to give us the bare words and facts, but we come in to supply the thoughts. That's my small experience. So far as the Massachusetts calendar and Bowick's navigator and Deb's arithmetic goes, signs and wonders. A pity if there is nothing wonderful in signs, insignificant in wonders. There is a clue somewhere. Wait a bit. Histarch. By Jove. I have it. Look you, Doubloon. Your zodiac here is the life of man in one round chapter. And now I'll read it off straight out of the book. Come, almanac. To begin, there's Aries, or the ram. Lyris dog. He begets us. Then Taurus, or the bull. He bumps us the first thing. Then Gemini, or the twins. That is virtue and vice. We try to reach virtue. When low comes Cancer the crab, and drags us back. And here, going from virtue, Leo, a roaring lion, lies in the path. He gives a few fierce bites and surly dabs with his paw. We escape and hail Virgo the virgin. That's our first love. We marry and think to be happy for aye. When pop comes Libra, or the scales, happiness weighed and found wanting. And while we are very sad about that, Lord, how we suddenly jump as Scorpio, or the scorpion stings us in the rear. We are curing the wound when wong come the arrows all around. Sagittarius, or the archer, is amusing himself as we pluck out the shafts. Stand aside. Here's the battering ram. Capricornus, or the goat. Full tilt he comes rushing, and headlong we are toss edition when Aquarius, or the water-bearer, pours out his whole deluge and drowns us. And to wind up with Pisces, or the fishes, we sleep. There's a sermon now written high heaven, and the sun goes through it every year, and yet comes out of it all alive and hearty. Jolly he aloft there wheels through toil and trouble. And so Aloe here does jolly stub. Jolly is the word for Iadun, but stop. Here comes little King Post dodge round the try-works now, and let's hear what he'll have to say. There he's before it. He'll out with something presently. So he's beginning. I see nothing here but a round thing made of gold. And whoever raises a certain whale, this round thing belongs to him. So what's all this staring been about? It is worth $16. That's true. And at 2 cents the cigar, that's a 960 cigars. I won't smoke dirty pipes like Stubb, but I like cigars. And here's 960 of them. So here goes Flask aloft to spy him out. Shall I call that wise or foolish now? If it be really wise, it has a foolish look to it. Yet if it be really foolish, then it has a sort of wisish look to it. But if asked, here comes our old man's man. The old hearse driver he must have been. That is before he took to the sea. He luffs up before the Doubloon. Hello. And goes round the other side of the Mont Saint. Why, there's a horseshoe nailed on that side. And now he's back again. What does that mean? Hark. He's muttering voice like an old worn-out coffee mill. Prick ears and listen. If the white whale be raised, it must be in a month and a day when the sun stands in some one of these signs. I've studied signs and know their marks. They were taught me 20 years ago by an old witch in Capina General. Now, in what sign will the sun then be? The horseshoe sign. For there it is, right opposite the gold. And what's the horseshoe sign? The lion is the horseshoe sign. The roaring and devouring lion. Ship. Old ship. My old head shakes to think of thee. There's another rendering now, but still one text. All sorts of men in one kind of world, you see. Dodge again. Here comes Kiku, all tattooing. Looks like the signs of the zodiac himself. What says the cannibal? As I live. He's comparing notes, looking at his thigh bone. Thinks the sun is in the thigh, or in the calf, or in the bowels, I suppose, as the old women talk surgeon's astronomy in the back country. And by Joe, he's found something there in the vicinity of his thigh. I guess it's Sagittarius, or the Archer. Now he don't know what to make of the Doubloon. He takes it for an old button off some king's trousers. But aside again, here comes that ghost devil Fidala, tail coiled out of sight as usual, oak in the toes of his pumps as usual. What does he say with that look of his? H only makes a sign to the sign and bows himself. There is a sun on the coin. Fire worshipper depend upon it. Oh, more and more. This way comes Pip. Poor boy. Woody had de-addition, or he's half horrible to me. He too has been watching all these interpreters, myself included edition. And look, now he comes to read with that nearly idiot face stand away again and hear him park. I look, you look, he looks, we look, you look, they look upon my soul. He's been studying Murray's grammar, improving his mind, poor fellow. But what's that he says now? I say I look, you look, he looks, we look, ye look, they look. Why, he's getting it by heart. Hissed again. I look, you look, he looks, we look, ye look, they look. Well, that's funny. And I, you and he. And we, ye, and they are all bats. And I'm a crow. Especially when I stand at top of this pine tree here. Caw, I'm crow? And where's the scarecrow? There he stands, 2 bones stuck into a pair of old trousers, and 2 more poked into the sleeves of an old jacket. Wonder if he means me. Complimentary, poor lad. I could go and hang myself. Anyway, for the present, I'll quit Pip's vicinity. I can stand the rest, for they have plain wits, but he's too crazy witty for my sanity. So I leave him muttering. Here's the ship's navel, the stablo here, and they are all on fire to unscrew it. But unscrew your navel, and what's the consequence? Then again, if it stays here, that is ugly, too, for when you nailed to the mast, it's a sign that things grow desperate. Old Ahab, the white whale, he'll nail you. This is a pine tree. My father in Old Talon County cut down a pine tree once and found a silver ring grown over in it. Some old dark his wedding ring. How did it get there? And so they'll say in the resurrection when they come to fish up this old mast and find a doubloon lodged in it with bedded oysters for the shaggy bark. Oh, the gold, the precious, precious gold. The green miser will hoard you soon. Hish, God goes among the world's blackberrying. Cook ho, cook and cook us. Jenny, hey, 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 Jenny, Jenny, and get your hoe cake done. Chapter 100 edition leg and a room. The Pequod of Nantucket meets the Samuel Enderby of London. Ship, ahoy has seen the white whale. So cried Ahab, once more hailing a ship showing English colors bearing down under the stern. Trumpeto-mouthed the old man was standing in his hoisted quarter-boat, his ivory leg plainly revealed to the stranger captain, who was carelessly reclining in his own boat's bow. He was a darkly tanned, burly, good-natured, fine-looking man of 60 or thereabouts, dressed in a spacious roundabout that hung around him in festons of blue pilot cloth, and one empty arm of this jacket streamed behind him like the embroidered arm of a hussar's surcoat. Has seen the white whale? See you this? And withdrawing it from the folds that had hidden it, he held up a white arm of sperm whale bone, terminating in a wooden head like a mallet. Man, my boat! Cried Ahab impetuously, and tossing about the oars near him. Stand by to lower. In less than a minute, without quitting his little craft, he and his crew were dropped to the water and were soon alongside of the stranger. But here a curious difficulty presented itself. In the excitement of the moment, Ahab had forgotten that since the loss of his leg, he had never once stepped on board of any vessel at sea but his own. And then it was always by an ingenious and very handy mechanical contrivance peculiar to the Pequod, and a thing not to be rigged and shipped in any other vessel at a moment's warning. Now, It is no very easy matter for anybody, except those who are almost hourly used to it, like whalemen, to clamber up a ship's side from a boat on the open sea, for the great swells now lift the boat high up toward the bulwarks, then instantaneously drop it halfway down to the kelson. So deprived of one leg, and the strange ship, of course, being altogether unsupplied with the kindly invention, Ahab now found himself abjectly reduced to a clumsy landsman again, hopelessly eyeing the uncertain, changeful height he could hardly hope to attain. It has before been hinted perhaps that every little untoward circumstance that befell him, and which indirectly sprang from his luckless mishap, almost invariably irritated or exasperated Ahab. And in the present instance, all this was heightened by the sight of the two officers of the strange ship leaning over the side by the perpendicular ladder of nailed cleats there, and swinging towards him a pair of tastefully ornamented man-ropes. For at first they did not seem to bethink them that a one-legged man must be too much of a to use their sea banisters. But this awkwardness only lasted a minute, because the strange captain, observing at a glance how affairs stood, cried out, I see a vast heaving there. Jump, boys, and swing over the cutting tackle." As good luck would have it, they had a whale alongside a day or two previous, and the great tackles were still aloft, and the massive curved blubber hook, now clean and dry, was still attached to the end. This was quickly lowered to Ahab, who, at once comprehending it all, slid his solitary thigh into the curve of the hook. It was like sitting in the fluke of an anchor or the crotch of an apple tree, and then giving the word, held himself fast, and at the same time also helped to hoist his own weight by pulling hand over hand upon one of the running parts of the tackle. Soon he was carefully swung inside the high bulwarks, and gently landed upon the capstan head. With his ivory arm frankly thrust forth in welcome, the other captain advanced, and Ahab, putting out his ivory leg and crossing the ivory arm like two swordfish blades, cried out in his walrus way, "Aye, hearty, let us shake bones together. An arm and a leg, an arm that never can shrink, do you see, and a leg that never can run? Where did thou see the white whale? How long ago?" "The white whale," said the Englishman, pointing his ivory arm towards the east, and taking a rawful sight along it as if it had been a telescope. "There I saw him on the line last season." "And he took that arm off, did he?" asked Ahab, now sliding down from the capstan and resting on the Englishman's shoulder as he did so. "He was the cause of it at Lea Saint, and that leg, too." "Spin me the yarn," said Ahab. "How was it?" "It was the first time in my life that I ever cruised on the line," began the Englishman. "I was ignorant of the white whale at that time. Well, one day we lowered for a pot of 4 or 5 whales, and my boat fastened to one of them, a regular circus horse he was, too, that went milling and milling round so that my boat's crew could only trim dish by setting all their sterns on the outer gunwale. Presently up breaches from the bottom of the sea a bouncing great whale with a milky white head and hump, all crow's feet and wrinkles. It was he, cried Ahab, suddenly letting out his suspended breath, and harpoon sticking in near his starboard fin. Aye, they were mine, my irons," cried Ahab exultingly. "But on. Give me a chance then," said the Englishman good-humoredly. "Oh, this old great-grandfather with a wide head and hump runs all afoam into the pod and goes to snapping furiously at my fast line. I see one to depart it, free the fast fish. An old trick, I know him. How it was exactly," continued the one-armed commander, "I do not know, but in biting the line, it got foul of his teeth, caught there somehow. But we didn't know it then, so that when we afterwards pulled on the line, bounce, we came plump onto his hump instead of the other whales that went off to windward, all fluking. Seeing how matters stood, and what a noble great whale it was, the noblest and biggest I ever saw, sir, in my life, I resolved to capture him, in spite of the boiling rage he seemed to be in, and thinking the haphazard line would get loose, or the tooth it was tangled to might draw, for I have a devil of a boat screw for a pull on a whale line. Seeing all this, I say. I jumped into my first mate's boat. Now, Mr. Mounttop's here, by the way, Captain Mounttop. Mounttop the captain. As I was saying, I jumped into Mounttop's boat, which do you see was gunwale and gunwale with mine. Then, snatching the first harpoon, let this old great-grandfather have it. But Lord, look you, sir. Hearts and souls alive, man. The next instant in a jiff, I was blind as a bat. Both eyes out, all befogged and bedeadened with black foam. The whale's tail looming straight up out of it, perpendicular in the air like a marble steeple. No use sterning all then. But as I was groping at midday with a blinding sun all crown jewels, as I was groping, I say after the second iron to toss it overboard. Down comes the tail like a lemur tower, cutting my boat in two, leaving each half in splinters, and flukes first the wide hump back through the wreck, as though it was all chips. We all struck out. To escape his terrible flailings, I seized hold of my harpoon pole, sticking in him, and for a moment clung to that like a sucking fish. But the combing sea dashed me off, and at the same instant the fish, taking one good dart forward, went down in a flash. And the barb of that cursed second iron towing along near me caught me here, clapping his hand just below his shoulder. Yes, caught me just here, I say, and bore me down to hell's flames, I was thinking. When all of a sudden, thank the good God, the barb ripped its way along the flesh, clear along the whole length of my arm, came out in my wrist, and up I floated and that gentleman there will tell you the are established by the way. Captain, Dr. Bunger, ship's surgeon. Bunger, my lad, the captain. Now, Bunger boy, spin your part of the yarn. The professional gentleman, thus familiarly pointed out, had been all the time standing near them, with nothing specific visible to denote his gentlemanly rank on board. His face was an exceedingly round but sober one. He was dressed in a faded blue woolen frock or shirt and patched trousers, and had thus far been dividing his attention between a marling spike he held in one hand and a pillbox held in the other, occasionally casting a critical glance at the ivory limbs of the two crippled captains. But at his superior's introduction of him to Ahab, he politely bowed and straightway went on to do his captain's bidding. It was a shocking bad wound, began the whale surgeon, and taking my advice, Captain Boomer. Here stood our old Sammy. Samuel Enderby is the name of my ship, interrupted the one-armed captain, addressing Ahab. Go on, my boy. Stood our old Sammy off to the northward to get out of the blazing hot weather there on the line. But it was no use. I did all I could, sat up with him nights, was very severe with him in the matter of diet. Oh, very severe, chimed in the patient himself, then suddenly altering his voice, drinking hot rum toddies with me every night, till he couldn't see to put on the bandages, and sending me to bed half-seas over about 3:00 in the morning. Oh, ye stars! He sat up with me indeed, and was very severe in my diet. Oh, a great watcher and very dietetically severe as Dr. Bunga. Bunga, you dog. Laugh out, why don't you? You know you're a precious jolly rascal. But Eva head boy, I'd rather be killed by you than kept alive by any other man. My captain, you must have ere this perceived, respected sir, said the imperturbable, godly-looking Bunger, slightly bowing to Ahab, is apt to be facetious at times. He spins us many clever things of that sort. But I may as well say en passant as the French remark that I myself, that is to say Jack Bunger, late of the reverend clergy, am a strict total abstinence man. I never drink water, cried the captain. He never drinks it. It's a sort of fits to him. Fresh water throws him into the hydrophobia. But go on with the arm story. Yes, I may as well, said the surgeon coolly. I was about observing, sir, before Captain Boomer's facetious interruption, that spite of my best and severest endeavors, the wound kept getting worse and worse. The truth was, sir, it was as ugly gaping a wound as surgeon ever saw, more than 2 feet and several inches long. I measured it with the lead line. In short, it grew black. I knew what was threatened, and off it came, but I had no hand in shipping that ivory arm there. That thing is against all rule. Pointing at it with the marlin spike. That is the captain's work, not mine. He ordered the carpenter to make it. He had that club hammer there put to the end to knock someone's brains out with, I suppose, as he tried mine once. He flies into diabolical passions sometimes. Do you see this dent, sir? Removing his hat and brushing aside his hair and exposing a bowl-like cavity in his skull, but which bore not the slightest scary trace, nor any token of ever having been a wound. Well, the captain there will tell you how that came here. He knows. No, I don't, said the captain. But his mother did. He was born with it. Oh, you solemn rogue. You bunger. Was there ever such another bunger in the watery world? Bunga, when you die, you ought to die in pickle, you dog. You should be preserved to future ages, you rascal. What became of the white whale? Now, cried Ahab, who thus far had been impatiently listening to this byplay between the two Englishmen. Oh, cried the one-armed captain. Oh, yes. Well, after he sounded, we didn't see him again for some time. In fact, as I before hinted, I didn't then know what whale it was that had served me such a trick, till some time afterwards. When coming back to the line, we heard about Moby-Dick, as some call him, and then I knew it was he. Did thou cross his wake again? Twice, but could not fasten. Didn't want to try to. Ain't one limb enough? What should I do without this other arm? And I'm thinking Moby-Dick doesn't bite so much as he swallows. Well then, interrupted Bunger, give him your left arm for bait to get the right. Do you know, gentlemen, very gravely and mathematically bowing to each captain in succession, do you know, gentlemen, that the digestive organs of the whale are so inscrutably constructed by divine providence that it is quite impossible for him to completely digest even a man's arm? And he knows it, too. So that what you take for the white whale's malice is only his awkwardness, for he never means to swallow a single limb. He only thinks to terrify by feints. But sometimes he is like the old juggling fellow, formerly a patient of mine in Ceylon, that making believe to swallow jackknives. Once upon a time let one drop into him in good earnest, and there it stayed for a 12-month or more. When I gave him in Moby-Dick and he heaved it up in small tacks, do you see? No possible way for him to digest that jackknife and fully incorporate it into his general bodily system. Yes, Captain Boomer, if you are quick enough about it, and have a mind to pawn one arm for the sake of the privilege of giving a decent burial to the other, why, in that case, the arm is yours. Only let the whale have another chance at you shortly, that's all. No thank you, Bunger, said the English captain. He's welcome to the army has since I can't help it, and didn't know him then, but not to the other one. No more white whales for me. I've lowered for him once, and that has satisfied me. There would be great glory in killing him, I know that, and there is a shipload of precious sperm in him. But harkee, he's best let alone. Don't you think so, Captain? Glancing at the ivory leg. He is, but he will still be hunted for all that. What's best, let alone that ours thing is not always what least allures. He's all a magnet. How long since thou saw him last? Which way heading? Bless my soul, and curse the foul fiends, cried Bunger, stoopingly walking round Ahab, and like a dog strangely snuffing. This man's blood. Bring the thermometer. It's at the boiling point. His pulse makes these planks beat. Sir, taking a lancet from his pocket and drawing near to Ahab's a room of vast, roared Ahab, dashing him against the bulwarks. Man the boat. Which way heading? Good God, cried the English captain, to whom the question was put. What's the matter? He was heading east, I think. Is your captain crazy? Whispering Fedallah. But Fedallah, putting a finger on his lips, slid over the bulwark to take the boat's steering oar. And Ahab, swinging the cutting tackle towards him, commanded the ship's sailors to stand by to lower. In a moment he was standing in the boat's stern, and the Manila men were springing to their oars. In vain the English captain hailed him, with back to the stranger's ship, and face set like a flint to his own. Ahab stood upright till alongside of the Pequod. Chapter 101. The Decanter. Air. The English ship fades from sight. Be it sat down here that she hailed from London and was named after the late Samuel Enderby, merchant of that city, the original of the famous whaling house of Enderby and Sons. A house which, in my poor whaleman's opinion, comes not far behind the united royal houses of the Tudors and Bourbons. In point of real historical inter-established how long, prior to the year of our Lord, 1775, this great whaling house was in existence, my numerous fish documents do not make plain. But in that year, 1775, it fitted out the first English ships that ever regularly hunted the sperm whale. Though for some score of years previous, ever since 1726, our valiant coffins and maces of Nantucket in the Vineyard had in large fleets pursued that leviathan, but only in the North and South Atlantic, not elsewhere. Be it distinctly recorded here that the Nantucketers were the first among mankind to harpoon with civilized steel the great sperm whale, and that for a half-century they were the only people of the whole globe who so harpooned him. In 1778, a fine ship, the Amelia, fitted out for the express purpose, and at the sole charge of the vigorous Enderbys, boldly rounded Cape Horn, and was the first among the nations to lower a whaleboat of any sort in the Great South Sea. The voyage was a skillful and lucky one, and returning to her berth with her hold full of the precious sperm. The Amelia's example was soon followed by other ships, English and American, and thus the vast sperm whale grounds of the Pacific were thrown open. But not content with this good deed, the indefatigable house again put itself. Samuel and all his sons, how many their mother only knows, and under their immediate opax, and partly, I think, at their expense, the British government was induced to send the sloop of war Rattler on a whaling voyage of discovery into the South Seas. Commanded by a naval post captain, the Rattler made a rattling voyage of it, and did some service. How much does not appear. But this is not all. In 1819, the same house fitted out a discovery whale ship of their own to go on a tasting cruise to the remote waters of Japan. That ship, while called the Siren, made a noble experimental cruise, and it was thus that the great Japanese whaling ground first became generally known. The Siren in this famous voyage was commanded by a Captain Coffin, a Nantucketer. All honor to the Enderbys, therefore, whose house, I think, exists to the present day, though doubtless the original Samuel must long ago have slipped his cable for the great South Sea of the other world. The ship named after him was worthy of the honor, being a very fast sailor and a noble craft in every way. I boarded her once at midnight somewhere off the Patagonian coast, and drank good flip down in the folks. It was a fine gam we had, and they were all trumps, every soul on board. A short life to them, and a jolly death. And that fine gam I had long, very long after old Ahab touched her planks with his ivory heel. It reminds me of the noble, solid sexes and hospitality of that ship. And may my parson forget me, and the devil remember me if ever I lose sight of it. Flip? Did I say we had flip? Yes, and we flipped it at the rate of 10 gallons the hour, and when the squall came, poured it squally off there by Patagonia. And all hands visitors, and all were called to reef top sails. We were so top-heavy that we had to swing each other aloft in bowlines. And we ignorantly furled the skirts of our jackets into the sails, so that we hung there reefed fast in the howling gale. A warning example to all drunken tars. However, the mast did not go overboard, and by we scrambled down, so sober that we had to pass the flip again. Though the savage salt spray bursting down the folks scuttle rather too much diluted and pickled it to my toss-sweet. The beef was fine, tough, but with body in it. They said it was bull beef, others that it was dromedary beef, but I do not know for certain how that was. They had dumplings, too, small but substantial, symmetrically globular and indestructible dumplings. I fancied you could feel them and roll them about in you after they were swallow addition. If you stooped over too far forward, you risked their pitching out of you like billiard balls. The bread, But that couldn't be help addition besides. It was an anti-scorbutic. In short, the bread contained the only fresh fare they had, but the folks was not very light, and it was very easy to step over into a dark corner when you ate it. But all in all, taking her from truck to helm, considering the dimensions of the cook's boilers, including his own live parchment boilers. For an aft, I say, the Samuel Enderby was a jolly ship of good fare and plenty, fine flip and strong. Crack fellows all, and capital from boot heels to hatband. But why was it, think you, that the Samuel Enderby and some other English whalers I know of, not all though, were such famous, hospitable ships that passed round the beef and the bread and the can and the joke, and were not soon weary of eating and drinking and laughing? I will tell you, the abounding good cheer of these English whalers is a matter for historical research. Nor have I been at all sparing of historical whale research when it has seemed need addition. The English were preceded in the whale fishery by the Hollanders, Zealanders, and Danes, from whom they derived many terms still extant in the fishery, and what is yet more, their fat old fashions, touching plenty to eat and drink. For as a general thing, the English merchant ship scrimps her crew, but not so the English whaler. Hence, in the English, this thing of whaling good cheer is not normal and natural, but incidental and particular, and therefore must have some special origin, which is here pointed out, and will be still further elucidated at addition. During my researches in the Leviathanic histories, I stumbled upon an ancient Dutch volume, which by the musty whaling smell of it, I knew must be about whalers. The title was Dan Coop Man, wherefore I concluded that this must be the invaluable memoirs of some Amsterdam cooper in the fishery, as every whale ship must carry its cooper. I was reinforced in this opinion by seeing that it was the production of one Fitz Swackhammer. But my friend Dr. Snodhead, a very learned man, professor of Low Dutch and High German in the College of Santa Claus and St. Potts, to whom I handed the work for translation, giving him a box of sperm candles for his trouble. This same Dr. Snodhead, so soon as he spied the book, assured me that Dan Coopman did not mean the cooper, but the merchant. In short, this ancient and learned Low Dutch book treated of the commerce of Holland, and among other subjects, contained a very interesting account of its whale fishery. And in this chapter it was headed Smear or Fat that I found a long, detailed list of the outfits for the larders and cellars of 180 sail of Dutch whalemen, from which list translated by Dr. Snodhead. I transcribed the following: 400,000 lb of beef, 60,000 lb Friesland pork, 150,000 lb of stockfish, 550,000 lb of biscuit, 72,000 lb of soft bread, 800 firins of butter, 20,000 lb Texel and Lydden cheese, 144,000 lb cheese, probably an inferior article, 550 anchors of Geneva, 800 barrels of beer. Most statistical tables are parchingly dry in the reading. Not so in the present case, however, where the reader is flooded with whole pipes, barrels, quarts, and gills of good gin and good cheer. At the time, I devoted 3 days to the studious digesting of all this beer, beef, and bread, during which many profound thoughts were incidentally suggested to me, capable of a transcendental and Platonic application. And furthermore, I compiled supplementary tables of my own, touching the probable quantity of stockfish, and so on, consumed by every Low Dutch harpooner in that ancient Greenland and Spitzberg and whale fishery. In the first place, the amount of butter and Texel and Lydden cheese consumed seems amazing. I impute it, though, to their naturally anxious natures, being rendered still more anxious by the nature of their vocation, and especially by their pursuing their game in those frigid polar seas on the very coasts of that Eskimo country where the convivial natives pledge each other in bumpers of train oil. The quantity of beer, too, is very large, 800 barrels. Now, as those polar fisheries could only be prosecuted in the short summer of that climate, so that the whole cruise of one of these Dutch whalemen, including the short voyage to and from the Spitzbergen Sea, did not much exceed 3 months, say, and reckoning 30 men to each of their fleet of 180 sail. We have 400 low Dutch seamen in all. Therefore, I say we have precisely 2 barrels of beer per man for a 12 weeks' allowance, exclusive of his fair proportion of that 550 anchors of gin. Now, whether these gin and beer harpooners, so fuddled as one might fancy them to have been, were the right sort of men to stand up in a boat's head and take good aim at flying whales, this would seem somewhat improbable. Yet, they did aim at them and hit them, too. But this was very far north, be it remembered, where beer agrees well with the Constitution. Upon the equator, in our southern fishery, beer would be apt to make the harpooner sleepy at the masthead and boozy in his boat, and grievous loss might ensue to Nantucket and New Bedford. But no more. Enough has been said to show that the old Dutch whalers of 2 or 3 centuries ago were high livers, and that the English whalers have not neglected so excellent an example. For say they, when cruising in an empty ship, if you can get nothing better out of the world, get a good dinner out of it at Lea Saint, and this empties the decanter. Chapter 102. A Bower in the Aridides. Hitherto, in descriptively treating of the sperm whale, I have chiefly dwelt upon the marvels of his outer aspect, or separately, and in detail, upon some few interior structural features. But to a large and thorough sweeping comprehension of him, it behooves me now to unbutton him still further, and untagging the points of his hose, unbuckling his garters, and casting loose the hooks and eyes of the joints of his innermost bones, set him before you in his ultimatum, that is to say, in his unconditional skeleton. But how now? Ishmael, how is it that you, a mere oarsman in the fishery, pretend to know aught about the subterranean parts of the whale? Did erudite Stubb mounted upon your capstan deliver lectures on the anatomy of the citation, and by help of the windlass, hold up a specimen reef for exhibition? Explain thyself, Ishmael. Can you land a full-grown whale on your deck for examination as a cook dishes a roast pig? Surely not. A veritable witness have you hitherto been, Ishmael. But have a care how you seize the privilege of Jonah alone, the privilege of discoursing upon the joists and beams, the rafters, ridge-poles, sleepers, and underpinnings making up the framework of the Leviathan, and be like of the tallow vats, dairy rooms, butteries, and cheeseries in his bowels. I confess that since Jonah, few whalemen have penetrated very far beneath the skin of the adult whale. Nevertheless, I have been blessed with an opportunity to dissect him in miniature. In a ship I belonged to, a small cub sperm whale was once bodily hoisted to the deck for his poke or bag to make sheaths for the barbs of the harpoons and for the heads of the lances. Think you I let that chance go without using my boat hatchet and jackknife, and breaking the seal, and reading all the contents of that young cub? And as for my exact knowledge of the bones of the Leviathan in their gigantic full-grown development, for that rare knowledge, I am indebted to my late royal friend Tranquo, King of Tran, one of the Aridides, for being at Tran years ago, when attached to the trading ship Day of Ailers. I was invited to spend part of the Arcadian holidays with the Lord of Tran at his retired palm villa at Popella, a seaside glen not very far distant from what our sailors called Bamboo Town, his capital. Among many other fine qualities, my royal friend Tranquo, being gifted with a devout love for all matters of barbaric virtu, had brought together in Popella whatever rare things the more ingenious of his people could invent, chiefly carved woods of wonderful devices, chiseled shells, inlaid spears, costly paddles, aromatic canoes, and all these distributed among whatever natural wonders the wonder-freighted tribute-render thundering waves had cast upon his shores. Chief among the latter was a great sperm whale, which after an unusually long raging gale, had been found dead and stranded. with his head against a coconut tree, whose plumage like tufted droopings seemed his verdant jet. When the vast body had at last been stripped of its fathom-deep enfoldings, and the bones became dust dry in the sun, then the skeleton was carefully transported up the Popella Glen, where a grand temple of lordly palms now sheltered it. The ribs were hung with trophies. The vertebrae were carved with Arsacides annals in strange hieroglyphics. In the skull, the priest kept up an unextinguished aromatic flame, so that the mystic head again sent forth its vapory spout. While suspended from a bough, the terrific lower jaw vibrated over all the devotees like the hair-hung sword that so affrighted Damocles. It was a wondrous sight. The wood was green as mosses of the icy glen. The trees stood high and haughty, feeling their living sap. The industrious earth beneath was as a weaver's loom with a gorgeous carpet on it, whereof the ground vine tendrils formed the warp and woof, and the living flowers the figures. All the trees with all their laden branches, all the shrubs and ferns and grasses, the message-carrying air. All these unceasingly were active. Through the lacings of the leaves the great sun seemed a flying shuttle weaving the unweaved viewer. Oh, busy weaver, unseen weaver, pause one word. Whither flows the fabric? What palace may it deck? Wherefore all these ceaseless toilings speak? Weaver, stay thy hand, but one single word with thee. Nay, the shuttle flies, the figures float from forth the loom. The fresh rushing carpet forever slides away. The weaver god, he weaves, and by that weaving is he deafened, that he hears no mortal voice. And by that humming, we too who look on the loom are deaf in addition, and only when we escape it shall we hear the thousand voices that speak through it. For even so it is in all material factories. The spoken words that are inaudible among the flying spindles, those same words are plainly heard without the walls bursting from the opened casements. Thereby have villainies been detected on mortal. Then be heedful, for so in all this din of the great world's loom, thy subtlest thinkings may be overheard afar. Now amid the green life restless loom of that Arcadian wood, the great white worshipped skeleton lay lounging, a gigantic idler. Yet as the ever-woven, verdant warp and woof intermixed and hummed around him, the mighty idler seemed the cunning weaver, himself all woven over with the vines, every month assuming greener, fresher veer, but himself a skeleton. Life folded death, death trellised life, the grim god wived with youthful life, and begot him curly-headed glories. Now when, with the royal trank, I visited this wondrous whale, and saw the skull and altar, and the artificial smoke ascending from where the real jet had issued, I marveled that the king should regard a chapel as an object of veru. He laughed addition, but more I marveled that the priest should swear that smoky jet of his was genuine. To and fro I paced before this skeleton, brushed the vines aside, broke through the ribs, and with a ball of arcaded twine, wandered, eddied long amid its many winding shaded colonnades and arbors. But soon my line was out, and following it back, I emerged from the opening where I enter addition. I saw no living thing within. Naught was there but bones. Cutting me a green measuring rod, I once more dived within the skeleton. From their arrow slit in the skull, the priest perceived me taking the altitude of the final rib. How now? They shout addition. Darst thou measure this our god? That's for us. I pray saints well, how long do you make him then? But hereupon a fierce contest rose among them, concerning feet and inches. They cracked each other's sconces with their yardsticks. The great skull echoed, and seizing that lucky chance, I quickly concluded my own measurements. These measurements I now propose to set before you. But first, be it recorded that in this matter, I am not free to utter any fancied measurement I please, because there are skeleton authorities you can refer to test my accuracy. There is a Leviathanic museum, they tell me, in Hull, England, one of the whaling ports of that country, where they have some fine specimens of finbacks and other whales. Likewise, I have heard that in the Museum of Manchester in New Hampshire, they have what the proprietors call the only perfect specimen of a Greenland or river whale in the United States. End quote. Moreover, at a place in Yorkshire, England, Burton Constable by name, a certain Sir Clifford Constable has in his possession the skeleton of a sperm whale, but of moderate size, by no means of the full-grown magnitude of my friend, King Tranquos. In both cases, the stranded whales to which these two skeletons belonged were originally claimed by their proprietors upon similar grounds. King Tranquo seizing his because he wanted it, and Sir Clifford because he was lord of the sceneries in those parts. Sir Clifford's whale has been articulated throughout, so that like a great chest of drawers, you can open and shut him in all of his bony cavities, spread out his ribs like a gigantic fan, and swing all day upon his lower jaw. Locks are to be put upon some of his trap doors and shutters, and a footman will show round future visitors with a bunch of keys at his side. Sir Clifford thinks of charging tuppence for a peep at the whispering gallery in the spinal column, 3d to hear the echo of the hollow of his cerebellum, and 6d for the unrivaled view from his forehead. The skeleton dimensions I shall now proceed to set down are copied verbatim from my right arm, where I had them tattooed. As in my wild wanderings at that period, there was no other secure way of preserving such valuable statistics. But as I was crowded for space, and wished the other parts of my body to remain a blank page for a poem I was then composing, at least what untattooed parts might remain, I did not trouble myself with the odd inches, nor indeed should inches at all enter into a congenial measurement of the whale. Chapter 103. Measurement of the whale's skeleton. In the first place, I wish to lay before you a particular plain statement touching the living bulk of this Leviathan, whose skeleton we are briefly to exhibit. Such a statement may prove useful here. According to a careful calculation I have made, and which I partly base upon Captain Scoresby's estimate of 70 tons for the largest size Greenland whale of 60 feet in length. According to my careful calculation, I say a sperm whale of the largest magnitude between 85 and 90 feet in length and something less than 40 feet in its fullest circumference. Such a whale will weigh at least 90 tons, so that reckoning 13 men to a ton, he would considerably outweigh the combined population of a whole village of 100 inhabitants. Think you not, then, that brains like yoked cattle should be put to this Leviathan to make him at all budge to any landsman's imagination? Having already in various ways put before you his skull, spout hole, jaw, teeth, tail, forehead, fins, and divers other parts, I shall now simply point out what is most interesting in the general bulk of his unobstructed bones. But as the colossal skull embraces so very large a proportion of the entire extent of the skeleton, as it is by far the most complicated part, and as nothing is to be repeated concerning it in this chapter, you must not fail to carry it in your mind or under your arm as we prosedition otherwise. You will not gain a complete notion of the general structure we are about to view. In length, the sperm whale skeleton at Tran measured 72 feet, so that when fully invested and extended in life, he must have been 90 feet long. For in the whale, the skeleton loses about 1/5 in length compared with the living body. Of this 72 ft, his skull and jaw comprised some 20 feet, leaving some 50 feet of plain backbone. Attached to this backbone, for something less than a third of its length, was the mighty circular basket of ribs which once enclosed his vitals. To me, this vast ivory-ribbed chest with the long unwreathed spine extending far away from it in a straight line not a little resembled the hull of a great ship new laid upon the stocks when only some 20 of her naked bow ribs are inserted and the keel is otherwise for the time but a long disconnected timber. The ribs were 10 on a side. The first to begin from the neck was nearly 6 feet long. The second, third, and fourth were each successively longer till you came to the climax of the fifth, or one of the middle ribs, which measured 8 feet and some inches. From that part, the remaining ribs diminished, till the 10th and last only spanned 5 feet and some inches. In general thickness, they all bore a seemly correspondence to their length. The middle ribs were the most arch-addition in some of the arcs. They are used for beams whereon to lay footpath bridges over small streams. In considering these ribs, I could not but be struck anew with the circumstance so variously repeated in this book that the skeleton of the whale is by no means the mold of his invested epherum, the largest of the tran ribs. One of the middle ones occupied that part of the fish which in life is greatest in depth. Now, the greatest depth of the invested body of this particular whale must have been at least 16 feet, whereas the corresponding rib measured but little more than 8 feet, so that this rib only conveyed half of the true notion of the living magnitude of that part. Besides, for some way, where I now saw but a naked spine, all that had been once wrapped round with tons of added bulk and flesh, muscle, blood, and bowels, still more, for the ample fins, I here saw but a few disordered joints, and in place of the weighty and majestic but boneless flukes, an utter blank. How vain and foolish then, thought I, for timid, untraveled man to try to comprehend aright this wondrous whale, by merely poring over his dead, attenuated skeleton stretched in this peaceful wood. No, only in the heart of quickest perils, only when within the eddings of his angry flukes, only on the profound unbounded sea can the fully invested whale be truly and livingly found out. But the spine, for that the best way we can consider it is with a crane to pile its bones high up on end. No speedy enterprise. But now it's done, it looks much like Pompey's pillar. There are 40 and odd vertebrae in all, which in the skeleton are not locked together. They mostly lie like the great knobbed blocks on a Gothic spire, forming solid courses of heavy masonry. The largest, a middle one, is in width something less than 3 feet and in depth more than 4. The smallest, where the spine tapers away into the tail, is only 2 in width and looks something like a white billiard ball. I was told that there were still smaller ones, but that they had been lost by some little cannibal urchins, the priest's children, who had stolen them to play marbles with. Thus we see how that the spine of even the hugest of living things tapers off at last in a simple child's play. Chapter 104. The Fossil Whale. From his mighty bulk the whale affords a most congenial theme whereon to enlarge, amplify, and generally expatiate. Would you? You could not compress him. By good rights he should only be treated of an imperial folio, not to tell over again his furlongs from spherical to tail, and the yards he measures about the Wy-Saint. Only think of the gigantic involutions of his intestines where they lie in him like great cables and horrors coiled away in the subterranean orop deck of a line of battleship. Since I have undertaken to manhandle this Leviathan, it behooves me to approve myself omnisciently exhaustive in the enterprise, not overlooking the minutest sanal germs of his blood, and spinning him out to the uttermost coil of his bowels. Having already described him in most of his present habitatory and anatomical peculiarities, it now remains to magnify him in an archaeological fossilis and antediluvian point of view. Applied to any other creature than the Leviathan, to an ant or a flea, such portly terms might justly be deemed unwarrantably grandiloquent. But when Leviathan is the text, the case is alteredition. Fiend am I to stagger to this emprise under the weightiest words of the dictionary. And here be it said that whenever it has been convenient to consult one in the course of these dissertations, I have invariably used a huge quarto edition of Johnson expressly purchased for that purpose, because that famous lexicographer's uncommon personal bulk more than fitted him to compile a lexicon to be used by a whale author like me. One often hears of writers that rise and swell with their subject, though it may seem but an ordinary one. How then, with me writing of this Leviathan, unconsciously my chirography expands into placard capitals. Give me a condor's quill. Give me Vuvius's crater for an inkstand. Friends, Hold my AR, miss, for in the mere act of penning my thoughts of this Leviathan, they weary me and make me faint with their outreaching comprehensiveness of sweep, as if to include the whole circle of the sciences and all the generations of whales and men and mastodons, past, present, and to come, with all the revolving panoramas of empire on earth and throughout the whole universe, not excluding its suburbs. Such and so magnifying is the virtue of a large and liberal theme. We expand to its bulk. To produce a mighty book, you must choose a mighty theme. No great and enduring volume can ever be written on the flea, though many there be who have tried it. Ere entering upon the subject of fossil whales, I present my credentials as a geologist by stating that in my miscellaneous time I have been a stonemason, and also a great digger of ditches, canals, and wells, wine vaults, and cellars, and cistern of all sorts. Likewise, by way of preliminary, I desire to remind the reader that while in the earlier geological strata, there are found fossils of monsters now almost completely extinct, these subsequent relics, discovered in what are called the tertiary formations, seem the connecting, or at any rate intercepted links between the antichronical creatures and those whose remote posterity are said to have entered the ark. All the fossil whales hitherto discovered belong to the tertiary period, which is the last preceding the superficial formations. And though none of them precisely answer to any known species of the present time, they are yet sufficiently akin to them in general respects to justify their taking rank as citation fossils. Detached, broken fossils of pre-Adamite whales, fragments of their bones and skeletons, have within 30 years past at various intervals been found at the base of the Alps, in Lombardy, in France, in England, in Scotland, and in the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Among the more curious of such remains is part of a skull which in the year 1779 was disinterred in the Rue Dauphine in Paris, a short street opening almost directly upon the palace of the Tuileries, and bones disinterred in excavating the great docks of Antwerp in Napoleon's time. Cuvier pronounced these fragments to have belonged to some utterly unknown leviathanic species. But by far the most wonderful of all citation relics was the almost complete vast skeleton of an extinct monster found in the year 1842 on the plantation of Judge Cree in Alabama. The awe-stricken credulous slaves in the vicinity took it for the bones of one of the fallen angels. The Alabama doctors declared it a huge reptile and bestowed upon it the name of Basilosaurus. But some specimen bones of it being taken across the sea to Owen, the English anatomy saint, it turned out that this alleged reptile was a whale, though of a departed species. A significant illustration of the fact again and again repeated in this book, that the skeleton of the whale furnishes but little clue to the shape of his fully invested body. So Owen rechristened the monster Zygalodon, and in his paper read before the London Geological Society pronounced it in substance one of the most extraordinary creatures which the mutations of the globe have blotted out of existence. When I stand among these mighty Leviathan skeletons, skulls, tusks, jaws, ribs, and vertebrae, all characterized by partial resemblances to the existing breeds of sea monsters, but at the same time bearing, on the other hand, similar affinities to the annihilated antichronical leviathans, their incalculable seniors, I am by a flood borne back to that wondrous period, ere time itself can be said to have begun, for time began with man. Here Saturn's gray chaos rolls over me, and I obtain dim, shuddering glimpses into those polar eternities, when wedged bastions of ice pressed hard upon what are now the tropics, and in all the 25,000 mi of this world's circumference, not an inhabitable hand's breadth of land was visible. Then the whole world was the whales and king of creation. He left his wake along the present lines of the Andes and the Himalayas. Who can show a pedigree like Leviathan? Ahab's harpoon had shed older blood than the pharaohs. Methuselah seems a schoolboy. I look round to shake hands with Shem. I am horror-struck at this anti-mosaic, unsourced existence of the unspeakable terrors of the whale, which having been before all time, must needs exist after all humane ages are over. But not alone has this Leviathan left his pre-Adamite traces in the stereotype plates of nature, and in limestone and marl becked his ancient be-saint, but upon Egyptian tablets, whose antiquity seems to claim for them an almost fossiliferous character. We find the unmistakable print of his fin. In an apartment of the great temple of Dendera some 50 years ago, there was discovered upon the granite ceiling a sculptured and painted planosphere abounding in centaurs, griffins, and dolphins, similar to the grotesque figures on the celestial globe of the moderns. Gliding among them, old Leviathans swam as of yore. Was there swimming in that planosphere centuries before Solomon was cradle edition? Nor must there be omitted another strange attestation of the antiquity of the whale in his own ass. Post-Divian reality as set down by the venerable John Leo, the old barber traveler. Quote, "Not far from the seaside they have a temple, the rafters and beams of which are made of whale bones, for whales of a monstrous size are oftentimes cast up dead upon that shore. The common people imagine that by a secret power bestowed by God upon the temple, no whale can pass it without immediate death. But the truth of the matter is that on either side of the temple there are rocks that shoot 2 miles into the sea and wound the whales when they light upon him. They keep a whale's rib of an incredible length for a miracle, which lying upon the ground with its convex part uppermost, makes an arch, the head of which cannot be reached by a man upon a camel's back. This rib, says John Leo, is said to have lain there 100 years before I saw it. Their historians affirm that a prophet who prophesied of Muhammad came from this temple, and some do not stand to assert that the prophet Jonas was cast forth by the whale at the base of the temple." End quote. In this Africal of the whale I leave you, reader, and if you be a Nantucketer and a whaleman, you will silently worship there. Chapter 105. Does the whale's magnitude diminish? Will he perish? Inasmuch then as this Leviathan comes floundering down upon us from the headwaters of the eternities, it may be fitly inquired whether in the long course of his generations he is not degenerated from the original bulk of his sires. But upon investigation, we find that not only are the whales of the present day superior in magnitude to those whose fossil remains are found in the tertiary system, embracing a distinct geological period prior to man, but of the whales found in that tertiary system, those belonging to its latter formations exceed in size those of its earlier ones. Of all the pre-Adamite whales yet exhumed, by far the largest is the Alabama one mentioned in the last chapter, and that was less than 70 feet in length in the skeleton, whereas we have already seen that the tape measure gives 72 ft for the skeleton of a large-sized modern whale. And I have heard on whaleman's authority that sperm whales have been captured near 100 feet long at the time of capture. But may it not be that while the whales of the present hour are in advance in magnitude upon those of all previous geological periods, may it not be that since Adam's time they have degenerate addition? Assuredly we must conclude so if we are to credit the accounts of such gentlemen as Pliny and the Ancient. Naturalists generally, for Pliny tells us of whales that embraced acres of living bulk and Aldrandes of others which measured 800 feet in length rope walks and Thames tunnels of whales, and even in the days of Banks and Slander Cook's naturalists we find a Danish member of the Academy of Sciences setting down certain Iceland whales Ridensicer or wrinkled bellies at 120 yards, that is 360 feet, and Lacépède the French naturalist in his elaborate history of whales in the very beginning of his work page 3 sets down the right whale at 100 m 328 ft, and this work was published so late as AD 1825, but will any whaleman believe these stories? Number the whale of today is as big as his ancestors in Pliny's times, and if ever I go where Pliny is, I a whaleman more than he was, will make bold to tell him so, because I cannot understand how it is that while the Egyptian mummies that were buried thousands of years before even Pliny was born do not measure so much in their coffins as a modern Kukian in his socks. And while the cattle and other animals sculptured on the oldest Egyptian and Nineveh tablets by the relative proportions in which they are drawn, just as plainly prove that the hybrid, stall-fed, prized cattle of Smithfield not only equal, but far exceed in magnitude the fattest of Pharaoh's fat kind. In the face of all this, I will not admit that of all animals the whale alone should have degenerate edition. But still another inquiry remains, one often agitated by the more recondite Nantucketers, whether owing to the almost omniscient lookouts at the mastheads of the whale ships, now penetrating even through Bering Straits, and into the remotest secret drawers and lockers of the world, and the 1,000 harpoons and lances darted along all continental seas since the moot point is whether Leviathan can long endure so wide a chase and so remorseless a havoc, whether he must not at last be exterminated from the waters, and the last whale like the last man smoke his last pipe, and then himself evaporate in the final puff. Comparing the humped herds of whales with the humped herds of buffalo, which not 40 years ago overspread by tens of thousands the prairies of Illinois and Missouri, and shook their iron manes, and scowled with their thunder-clotted brows upon the sites of populous river capitals, where now the polite broker sells you land at $1 an inch. In such a comparison, an irresistible argument would seem furnished to show that the hunted whale cannot now escape speedy extinction. But you must look at this matter in every light. Though so short a period ago, not a good lifetime, the census of the buffalo in Illinois exceeded the census of men now in London. And though at the present day not one horn or hoof of them remains in all that region, and though the cause of this wondrous extermination was the spear of man, yet the far different nature of the whale hunt peremptorily forbids so inglorious an end to the Leviathan. 40 men in one ship hunting these sperm whales for 48 months think that they have done extremely well, and thank God if at last they carry home the oil of 40 fish. Whereas in the days of the old Canadian and Indian hunters and trappers of the West, when the far West, in whose sunset suns still rise, was a wilderness and a virgin, the same number of moccasin men for the same number of months mounted on horse, instead of sailing in ships, would have slain not 40 but 40,000 and more buffaloes, a fact that if need were could be statistically stat addition. Nor considered aright does it seem any argument in favor of the gradual extinction of the sperm whale, for example, that in former years, the latter part of the last century, say these leviathans in small pods were encountered much oftener than at present, and in consequence the voyages were not so prolonged, and were also much more remunerative because, as has been elsewhere noticed, those whales influenced by some views to safety now swim the seas in immense caravans, so that to a large degree these scattered solitaries, yolks, and pods, and schools of other days are now aggregated into vast, but widely separated, unfrequent armies, that is all. And equally fallacious seems the conceit that because the so-called whalebone whales no longer haunt many grounds in former years abounding with them, hence that species also is declining, for they are only being driven from promontory to cape. And if one coast is no longer enlivened with their jets, then be sure some other and remoter strand has been very recently startled by the unfamiliar spectacle. Furthermore, concerning these last-mentioned leviathans, they have two firm fortresses, which in all human probability will forever remain impregnable. And as upon the invasion of their valleys, the frosty Swiss have retreated to their mountains, so hunted from the Savis and glades of the Middle Seas, the whalebone whales can at last resort to their polar citadels, and diving under the ultimate glassy barriers and walls there, come up among icy fields and floes, and in a charmed circle of everlasting December, bid defiance to all pursuit from man. But as perhaps 50 of these whalebone whales are harpooned for one kashilo, Some philosophers of the folk have concluded that this positive havoc has already very seriously diminished their battalions. But though for some time past a number of these whales, not less than 13,000, have been annually slain on the northwest coast by the Americans alone. Yet there are considerations which render even this circumstance of little or no account as an opposing argument in this matter. Natural as it is to be somewhat incredulous concerning the populousness of the more enormous creatures of the globe. Yet what shall we say to Hardo, the historian of Goa, when he tells us that at one hunting the king of Siam took 4,000 elephants, that in those regions elephants are as numerous as droves of cattle in the temperate Silamis, and there seems no reason to doubt that if these elephants, which have now been hunted for thousands of years by Semiramis, by Porus, by Hannibal, and by all the successive monarchs of the East, if they still survive there in great numbers, much more may the great whale outlast all hunting, since he has a pasture to expatiate in, which is precisely twice as large as all Asia, both Americas, Europe, and Africa, New Holland, and all the isles of the sea combination. Moreover, we are to consider that from the presumed great longevity of whales, they're probably attaining an age of a century or more. Therefore, at any one period of time, several distinct adult generations must be contemporary. And what that is, we may soon gain some idea of by imagining all the graveyards, cemeteries, and family vaults of creation, yielding up the live bodies of all the men, women, and children who were alive 75 years ago, and adding this countless host to the present human population of the globe. Wherefore for all these things we account the whale immortal in his species, however perishable in his individuality. He swam the seas before the continents broke water. He once swam over the site of the Tours and Windsor Castle and the Kremlin. In Noah's flood, he despised Noah's Ark. And if ever the world is to be again flooded, like the Netherlands, to kill off its rats, then the eternal whale will still survive, and rearing upon the topmost crest of the equatorial flood, spout his froth defiance to the skies.